How many here are developers? That's what I expected. Right. How many here want to be CTOs going forward at a later point in their career? Let's say for Jaguar, Land Rover or company like that, which is pretty famous. Nobody wants to be a CTO. Right. That's interesting. Right. Uh, so, uh, I want this session to be quite interactive. So, my name is Shiban Banerjee. I have 15 years of CTO experience in companies such as Marks and Spencers, Jaguar, Land Rover, currently Cambridge University, spend a lot of time in UK. Currently, I'm the CTO of a company called Drink Prime. Right. Now, this would be pretty much a non-tech session from at least the looks of it, right? But as long as I can turn the slides off on, right. But why is this important to you? I used the phrase turning ideas into products, right? If I can take the example of the tech ladder, how you progress from a developer to whatever your aspirations are, right? At the beginning, so I started as a developer as well. So we are developers, right? We are worried about a requirement, right? A screen, a page, something, something, 5 classes, properties, functions, and all of that. Then we become tech leads, wherein we are worried about requirements, something we are doing ourselves, but also the job of what others are doing. So we are responsible for others' work. Great. Till now, it's actually, so it's technical requirements, right? Great. Then, since this is where things start becoming funny, right? Now people come to you with business requirements. So you have a lot of tech leads and developers, but people will come to you with business requirements. So they no longer need just a feature. What they need is, I'm an ops leader. My technician goes out into the field. I want my customer to get a notification saying he's out for delivery, and I want my customer to be able to call that technician, but I don't want that technician's number to be available. So it has to be masked in some way. Great. So now you've got to translate that into technical requirements. You, along with others, would be developing that. Great. Now that's solution architect. Now in any large company, there is also a concept called enterprise architect. So as a solution architect, you are typically solution architects would be specific to a particular business area. So a customer experience solution architect, operations, etc., inventory and assets, for instance. Enterprise architect is when things start becoming insane. People really, literally expect you to know everything. So as an enterprise architect in any damn big company whatsoever, people expect you to be an expert in every business area, an expert in every technology, right? So somebody wanted to explore what would be sort of the driverless car backend and this and that, etc., etc., in another conference. So I was in a Microsoft conference giving a session earlier, and this guy comes to me. He's a CEO of something, something, something. He wants to discuss that with me, and he doesn't expect me to say no. So as an enterprise architect, you are expected to know everything. Of course, that's not possible. How you manage it is the trick, right? The idea behind me starting with this is that so you understand the bigger picture. Once you understand the picture, you know where you fit, and you can then decide where to go, right? And all this ladder structure, this has no relation to salary. I just uh, please, right? A great developer. So there is somebody in my team. She is 4 years of experience, 11 years younger than me. She's an awesome developer, better than what I ever was, right? So salary has nothing to do with this. This whole graph assumes that the skill level is the same, right? So don't confuse it with that. I'm sure we all want to earn. Next, at this stage, you are given a choice. You can become sort of engineering manager or head of engineering, as our first speaker was, and these people are damn technical, so they would know everything from there to here, right? The whole shebang. Then, but you also have an option to go into the product side. Of course, product has its own path, so a product manager need not be a developer and all of that. But at this stage, you have the worst headache, almost the worst headache of all. Nobody wants to do this, which is manage all this, right? Timelines and stuff like that, nobody likes it, right? But this is a choice, right? Now, then comes the big jump, right? Till now, what was business technical requirements earlier is now business requirements here, and then it was problems, right? So now, for example, here, as the head of engineering, people will be coming to you with problems. What does that mean? So they no longer have a business requirement. What they want is, my customer is dissatisfied because they are not, because they don't know when our guy is coming to their places. So solve this. That then leads to the notification to the customer for out to delivery, blah, 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 blah. So now you have a business problem. Now, at the end of the tech ladder, when you are an exec, when you are literally part of the management or the ownership of the company, there's something weird. The reason, one of the many reasons, one of the fundamental reasons why I wanted to give this talk here, considering this crowd, is that this is something that we never are exposed to as developers. As developers, no CEO would be coming to us and say that, I want to be the king of the world, give me a product, right? I have had the COO of one of the largest luxury car manufacturers in the world come and tell me something like, I want every customer complaint to be a wow moment for the customer, right? I'm struggling not to use profanity, but my literal reaction was, WTF, what are you talking about? Right? As developers, imagine somebody comes to you with this requirement. I'll give this example again shortly after, in a couple of slides later. The CEO of one of the largest retail stores in UK came and told me something like, I want to beat Amazon on my own turf. What does that mean? What will you build? Right? Now, as developers, you are never exposed to this. In any other department, you're always exposed, more and more you become experienced, you're exposed to the strategic stuff and all that. But tech is one of those weird things where you're never exposed to those kind of things, right? So my talk is about how you go about that, given that you will never have exposure to this, but when you are at this sort of the last two levels, people would expect you to do this, right? And they don't care whether you have or have not done that before, right? So this is just a small sample. Fair enough? And this is something you always know. It starts with being accountable for tasks, but slowly it becomes accountable for outcomes and people as well, which is a very different ballgame. But, right, so how do you turn ideas into products? I'm going to give a couple of examples for big companies, and then I'm going to explain how is this different for startups. Right, so both. I'm sure, how many here have an aspiration to launch their own startup or at least co-found one? Awesome, quite a lot. How many want to remain in their existing job? That's one guy. Two. At least the Loco-fi people should say yes. Right, so how do you turn ideas into products? First and foremost, ideas can never be products. Counterintuitive as they sound, I want to be the top of, sort of the king of the world, can never be a product. Find the problem. So while, for example, Elon Musk wants us to go to Mars, right? And that sounds like a fascinating product to all of us techies, right? To most at least. I saw the wins. Brilliant, but technically it's an awesome thing, right? Going to Mars. The thing is, those ideas would neither be tangible products nor would be sellable products. People won't go to Mars unless they have a problem which is fixed by when they go to Mars, right? So find the problem. Don't get blown away with the idea itself. Find the problem that you want to solve and drill it down into as much detail as possible. We want to help teachers and we want to help education. Our state of education in India is not good. Brilliant. What do you exactly want to do, right? Drill down into as much detail as possible. Who, when, what. Remember that I'll give examples of who, when, what I mean by that. Now, And then how will you solve that problem for someone? Let me give you an example, right? And this is a section I call I want to be king of the world, because this is literally what sort of visionaries, CEOs, founders sound like most of the time, right? I've seen a fair share of them. I'm sure many of you have as well, right? When the CEO calls you to the room and then there's, I want to do this, I want to do that, and this and that, right? So one of the biggest luxury car manufacturers in the world, the example which I was giving earlier, this is this was the chief operating officer, and this was the statement in a meeting room, and I was like, what exactly, right? Now, so who, when, and what? So the whole premise was that this is one of the biggest and the most well-known car manufacturers in the world, that to luxury cars. Now, a customer complain, right? So if you buy any product, if there is a problem, what would you do? You'll contact customer support, right? Or raise a ticket or something like that. If you buy a Ferrari, for example, you don't expect to be calling customer support, right? It's not supposed to go wrong anywhere. Same with these guys, right? So it's just supposed to work. So the fact that you're having to complain itself is by itself a problem. It's not good, right? But then who is the person that we are talking about here? So is it the average customer? But if that person is in a crowded neighborhood or at their own homes, they have a backup, right? So if I'm at my home, if I have to get somebody to repair my car, that's great. It's not that big of a problem. When would somebody be actually pissed? So UK has plenty of areas where you have sort of people, you're driving in places where there is nobody in a 5-mile radius, right? That's when, if my car breaks down, I'm incredibly frustrated. Why? Because A, the car broke down, and second, there is nobody in a 5-mile radius. So I know for a fact that any help would be at least 2 hours later, right? So who has the problem now? Rather than saying customer, so we have drilled that down to a customer who is on a holiday driving somewhere in the middle of mountains where there is nobody in a 5-mile radius, for instance, right? So now that's a more solvable problem, right? Global warming cannot be solved, right? You can solve one thing at a time, right? Same thing. So that's my customer when they are driving, right? When they are in that kind of a situation. And what are they exactly doing? So their car broke down. So first they would want what do they want? They want their car to not break down first, but then if it breaks down, they want to be very easily able to call somebody up, and they want that person to be there then and there, right? As 5-10 minutes, right? But it's the middle of nowhere. We actually did do exactly that, right? And that's a wow moment. How did we get to that point, right? So what we figured out is that how will it be a wow moment? So when your car has broken down, you know that sort of profanity aside, I won't use the terms, but then you know that there would be sort of 2-3 hours you would have to wait without actually doing anything. Now, what would be awesome at that point, because you're already pessimistic by that point, what would be awesome if you call somebody and then they arrive there 5 minutes later, right? It's as if it were a genie, because it's simply not possible. There was nobody around. So how did we go about that? So that is what the use case that would be the product. How can we first do preventive maintenance? So the car is jacked up with IoT. Each car I'm talking about gives about 1 to 5 GB of IoT data per hour. Because it's UK, middle of mountains, a lot of places wouldn't have any network at all. So any preventive maintenance would have to be self-corrective. So there was a lot of edge computing there, and based on the IoT signals, a lot of self-correction used to be happening on the cars. That's one part solved, but you can't solve everything via self-correcting mechanisms, however fancy that sounds. So we had plenty of IoT signals. So when any component, let's say, and I'm not fully conscious that I'm a full room full of React developers, not that component, but any component when they go below the 30% efficiency mark, they would give out an alert, right? We would have service centers all across the UK, and they would get the notification, and then they know where to come, right? Wrong, because that's only 30. So that component, let's say the engine, for the sake of simplicity, is at the 30% mark. By the time that actually breaks down, he would have been 200 kilometers or miles somewhere east, west, north, south, right? So, and this was the eureka moment. So we figured out that based on the travel pattern in the last few days and for that particular trip, what if we could predict? So we got at the 30% mark, so it went down. At the 30% mark, we know that there might be a problem. What if we can predict where he might be by the time it goes to 5%? We'll take the top 3 spots, and the alert which goes out to the service centers would have those predicted locations and not the original location. And yes, it's a sort of loss that we would get people to be at all those 3 locations, but fine, because a luxury car, luxury experience, it's worth it, right? So what would happen is that by the time somebody would pick sort of on the app, it was augmented reality and all of that, all fancy stuff. But the moment they called, within 5 minutes somebody's there, and they're like, wow, how did you get here so fast? And they forget at that time that there was actually sort of a problem to start with, right? So we boiled it down from there to here, right? So obviously it involved plenty of systems, augmented reality, plenty of front end, loads of APIs, third-party systems, etc., etc., and of course AI, because I talked of prediction and anything to do with prediction. People prefer these days to put it as AI, although we were predicting stuff 20 years ago, but at the moment everything is AI. Right. One other example, and I'll just sort of skip through it. The head of the largest retail store company in the UK, he started with, I want to beat Amazon at my own turf. We actually boiled it down to, right, so what if, so what you want is that people, when they come, so the kind of people who don't mind the inconvenience of going to a store, like online shopping is convenient, you don't have to get up. So for the non-lazy people of the world, when they come to your store, they should be in and out in 3 minutes. Meaning that if we can predict what items are popular at which sort of times of the day, then we can keep those at the front, meaning that if you know what you want, then you should be able to get in and out in 3 minutes. Great. The other part of experience is also sort of the human part of it. The fact that if you have a problem, if you have spilled a bottle of milk or something, spilled a bag of chips, somebody is immediately there to help you instead of getting embarrassed. So what we did was, using security cameras, we analyzed, detected motion, figured out things like congestion and stuff like that. They were sent on an app which we built for the staff who were strategically positioned. They knew if there is a congestion in that aisle, one of these people would be there in 5 seconds, right? Things like that. So the point which I'm trying to make, so it involved a lot of stuff, but the point which I'm trying to make is that it actually started with this, and this is a discussion which until you reach a certain stage, people won't be having with you. And I'm not talking about sort of people who want to launch their own startup. You can call yourself CEOs, kings, whatever. That's not the experience which I'm talking about. In that case, you will actually be starting from something like this, right? You will have a vision and mission. So it's important to boil that down. Otherwise, you will never land up in a product, at least a product which sort of works for customers. Right. So just a series of examples, but that sort of retail example which I gave, it included Azure, loads of AI, IoT, edge computing, loads of APIs. We actually wrote there were 6 systems which were built, 57 APIs, loads of other stuff, and all of that was done by a team of us 20 people in a space of 8 months, right? But before all of that came the part of boiling that thing down, right? Now, how is it different for a startup? Anybody, any guesses? Who were the sort of 50 people who raised their hands that they want to launch a startup? You were not, you were one of the two people who said, I want to be it by, uh, yeah, be in the same company. Which company do you work for? What? Free? Figures. And you, yourself? Okay, right. Huh, so that's more legitimate. Right. Right, anybody? How is it different from a startup? For a startup, yes. They don't have a product, so you sort of went in the right direction. Any company, any decent company would have a product, would have a service, right? But startups don't have a product, so you're enhancing something in a company, which is different because you have some sort of foundation. But for startups, the thing is, you can solve anything in the world. That sounds literally like freedom, right? But unfortunately, that's the biggest headache disguised as a blessing. Why? Because now you're going to work out what exactly you're going to solve. So I know a lot of startup founders who started with something like, I want to, in fact, my own sort of the Drink Prime started with, we're sort of India's first smart water purifier on subscription. So the founders actually started with, we wanted to provide clean and safe drinking water to 60% of India who don't have access to that. Great. What do you want to do? Right? So so what I'm telling now is actually not even the starting point. It started way before that, and a lot of startups started. So I in fact would be humble enough to say that I was the co-founder of a failed startup. So we launched something which did not work out. Blah blah blah. It was going very slowly, but so I know this sort of firsthand. Most startups start with that kind of an idea. I want to change education and this and that, right? You only need to watch Shark Tank for what they come up with, right? Right. Now the problem is, so this involves a different level of drill down. So I have collated here what some sort of a framework. So any of those 50 people who raised their hands earlier and who are mute now, all of you feel free to use this as a framework, right? This is not something I have invented, so all sorts of disclaimers there, but comes from Y Combinator and a whole host of other sources. But when when I gave the other example, I talked of who, when and what, right? Now, just sort of follow along with me. Too many hand movements, right? So, whom are you trying to help? What problem are you solving for them? So far, so good, same as what we were talking about earlier. But now, when do they have the problem? How frequently and how mandatory is the problem? So what you do is, maybe you have 50 ideas for a startup, right? Write them down in an Excel sheet, have these as columns, put the answer down and see what the answer, honestly answer them and see what the answers are. So what I mean by how frequently and mandatory, let's say if you are solving a problem which is a once a year problem, let's say tax, right? So your product would only be used once a year, right? So you can't be talking about stuff like, if you have an sort of aspiration that my product would be used by millions of people every day and blah blah blah, I'll build the next sort of WhatsApp or Facebook, won't happen, right? Right. Is it mandatory? My earlier startup was where we wanted to help teachers add more value to the students or sort of help the students better, etc., etc. Interestingly enough, I think we all know this the hard way. 70% of the teachers in India are sort of consider it optional to be adding more value to the students and all of that, right? So if something is not mandatory, people won't do it. Same as the Mars example. Why? So as long as something is optional, it will sort of, you take it for granted sort of that it probably 25% of the people will actually end up using it. Best case scenario, right? So is your problem, so when do people face their problem? Is it every day, right? How frequently? Ideally, the ideal startups, and there's a good talk by Kevin Hale of Y Combinator on this. So when do they have this problem? Ideally every day, ideally mandatory problem. Ideally they don't have a current solution, or whatever they do, so that problem existed, right? So they would have done something about it. Let's say Locofy is a good example. People do write code, right? So it isn't, you're just making it easier. So currently, so how frequently do people write code? Programmers do it every day. Is it mandatory? Yes, that's what the salary depends on, right? Now, what is the current solution? Of course, code, right? What is the cost of the current problem? It takes X amount of time to do, let's say, something. This is entirely subjective in this context, but so the cost of the problem is in terms of time, either time or money. So put this down, and how much is your solution going to help? So in Locofy's case, it might be something like it's going to save a couple of hours for medium complexity problems per hour or something like that, right? I'm sure you would have sort of a more exaggerated numbers than what I came up with at runtime, but you get the thing, right? So put this in an Excel sheet. This is sort of a well-known sort of framework. Uh, if you're if you tick all the boxes, then great. You do have at least the starting point. Then comes the point where you actually start executing the idea and all of that, right? But when you do this, what you will see is you come up with something that is almost never talked about. Now, this entire page, I'm sort of slide, I'm talking about how do you figure out what you solve. What is equally important is figuring out what not to solve. You can't solve everything on the planet, right? If I want to solve global warming, I simply can't. What I can possibly do is that there's a landfill, or there are plenty of landfills across sort of mini landfills, island architecture, so as to speak, in Bangalore itself, and I can have a solution where there's probably some chemical, something which just converts them into thin air, ideally, right? So figuring out what not to solve. Yeah, so that is sort of where I thought I'll end this. And I was sort of very, very excited. So till this point, any questions?